And now it's time for Through the Eyes of Dr. Mittleman, brought to you by Mittleman Eye, with 2 locations, West Palm Beach and Jupiter. And now here are your hosts, Jill Schweitzer and Dr. David Mittleman.
Good Saturday morning. Welcome, Dr. Mittleman, for another episode of Through the Eyes with Dr. Mittleman.
Well, thanks for having me again, Jill. Every episode is a new one that's different, that gives me the opportunity to share some of the things that I've experienced. And I love doing this.
Well, okay, so last week we talked about the tales from your residency days, which we couldn't even, we'll do another episode on that, I'm sure, because there's probably a gazillion. But these are stories from the interview experience that you had.
So it's not just that I've been an interviewee, and I'm actually an interviewer, because we interview people for our residency program. I have interviewed people for various other jobs, and there are stories from every side of this. And some of them are stories about me, some of them are stories about friends, and some of them are stories about people I've interviewed. Some of them are sad, some of them are fascinating, some of them are just downright funny.
Well, we're about to go for a ride. Once again, grab your coffee, settle in, and let's start with college interviews.
I don't know how they do college today, but I only applied to 5 different colleges. I was a little cocky. That's a personality trait that a lot of surgeons have. You know, the old joke goes, what's the difference between God and a surgeon? And the answer is, God knows he's not a surgeon. And so even back then, I was very confident. So I applied to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Penn, and MIT. And the interviewer said, the college admissions officer said, well, you need a safety. And I said, well, University of Pennsylvania is my safety. And he said, well, that's not a safety. And I looked at him with surprise, and I said, of course it is. And so I had to interview at all these places. Some of them were on campus. Some of them were alumni interviews. And when they asked me questions, I was very well versed. We'll talk about that a little later. But one of the things I highlighted was that I was going to major in Latin. I was going to be a classics major. And people looked at me and said, who were interviewing me, well, are you just using that as a line so you can get into this university? I said, no, I'm really going to major in Latin. I love Latin. I already have a year's worth of college credit, actually probably 2 years of college credit in Latin. And so when you interview, one of the things that I always recommend is that you highlight what's special about you, what's different about you, why you would give an area, although maybe a bad word these days, some diversity. And sure enough, I majored in Latin. I was a classics major. I graduated with honors in my major. I also majored in biology. I had a double major. We didn't have minors at Yale, but I would have had enough credits for a minor in art history. When I really love something, I go after it. But there was something about the way I told it that these interviewers believed me because it was true. And I went ahead and majored in it, and that set me apart. And that got me into every university that I wanted to go to.
So there you have it. Double down on what makes you unique and what interests you in your passion.
And if you have that passion, that is easily conveyable to someone who's interviewing you. If you don't have a passion, if you try to fake it, it does not work.
All right, so residency interviews. What did you learn through that process?
So residency interviews are a little more intimidating, a little less so now because they're on Zoom calls. But back then, you had to go to medical school or residency, and these are stories from both of those, where you went to a room with 8 other people and they called you back. Each residency program and medical school did it a little differently. For instance, at Cleveland Clinic in Case Western, they had a line of 10 doctors. You got 6 minutes with each doctor. An egg timer went off, and it was like speed dating. It was terrifying. You were always with a group of other people, and you knew they were your competition. Most residencies are 3 people. Some back then were 2 people. They don't really exist. Some were 4 or 5. And there were 60, 70 people, all the tops of their classes. So I get to Rochester. Rochester at Strong Memorial Hospital is a great program. I did not want to go there. There was no way. I would have taken any ophthalmology residency, and although I was fairly confident I would get the one I wanted, there are all kinds of quirks and little mishaps in the universe that can change things. One of the things in an interview is they will ask you, do you have any questions? They always ask you that. You always have to know your program that you're interviewing at, the job you're interviewing for. You should always have some questions. I didn't really have any questions because I didn't really want to go to Rochester, but I had to have something. So I looked at the interviewer, who was the head of the department, and I said, well, I grew up north of New York City. We get a little bit of snow. I hear you get a lot of snow. How much snow do you get? Nothing to do with the residency program. And he looked at me and said, about 89 inches. And I looked at him, must have had wide eyes, horrified look. And I said, all at once? And he looked at me and said, I'm not sure this program is for you. I sort of skulked away and realized, okay, don't say stupid things in your interview.
Lesson number 1.
Next stupid gaffe on my part. I was interviewing at the University of Iowa. When I talked to the residency director at my medical school, he said you have to apply to as many as you can. Many people today apply to 150, 200 residency programs. I applied to 40. And I did not apply anywhere west of Pittsburgh except for Iowa or south of D.C. except for Bascom-Palmer in Miami because I wanted to be in the Northeast. I knew where I wanted to be. I knew what I wanted to do. But Iowa, believe it or not, is one of the top 5 programs in the United States for ophthalmology. Many people outside of ophthalmology don't know that, but it's a beautiful hospital because it's a catchment area for a huge area. You see all kinds of weird things. It's great training. It's friendly Midwestern professors. I was a very good candidate. And so after the interviews, everybody was taken on a bus and given a tour. I was given a private tour. And they were showing off the area and the city. And I said, okay, well, where do people go to the movies? And so they drive me by this house, and they say, we go to the movies here. I said, that's a house. And they said, no, that's our Cineplex. I said, no, it's a house. Well, we have 2 screens that's converted into a movie theater. Now, remember, this is 1991. I'm from New York. I expected a big building with 10 theaters. We had them even back then. I restrained myself. I actually didn't say it with such surprise and dismay. I said, okay, where do people go shopping? And so even back then, I had expensive tastes. I loved Bloomingdale's. I couldn't afford Bloomingdale's. Certainly couldn't afford Saks or Nordstrom or Neiman's or Bergdorf Goodman. But I liked to look at clothes. And my grandfather was fairly well off, and every once in a while he would take me and buy some clothes. So I had some nice clothes. So they take me by the strip mall, not an enclosed mall, just a shopping center. And they said, well, this is where people buy their clothes. And it was a J.C. Penney. Oh, there's nothing wrong with J.C. Penney. And I very stupidly looked into it and said, I get my underwear at J.C. Penney. And I still do get my underwear at J.C. Penney, which is of merriment to most of my staff. And I said, but where do you go if you want to buy a fine suit for interviewing? And the gentleman looked at me and said, there's a Sears catalog store across the way. And I looked at him with horror in my eyes, and I said, no, Bloomingdale's, Saks, Macy's, Nordstrom's, Hecht's, which was a Baltimore store. Oh, no, J.C. Penney and Sears is where we get all our clothes. And I thought, okay, I can't come here. I need to at least go and look at clothes. One of the things that I loved about this area was Palm Beach and Worth Avenue, and I don't shop at Worth Avenue. It's out of my budget. But I love just looking. I love window shopping. So as we're going back to the residency physical area, to the hospital, I said, okay, can you get the New York Times? and I'm a little bit of a snob when it comes to newspapers. I still get the New York Times. And he said, oh, yes, you can get the New York Times delivered to your doorstep. And I'm thinking, yes, I have found home. I can at least read the newspaper every day. And he said, so I can do my crossword puzzle every day? And he said, oh, no. I said, but you said it could be delivered. Well, they'll mail you the Sunday Times, and you'll get it on Thursday. And I was so crestfallen. And I looked at the man, and I said, I don't think I can survive here. Which I shouldn't have said, because it was a great program, and I would have had great training. But I knew I would have been miserable.
That matters. So next.
So I interviewed at Yale, my alma mater from college. And I loved the Yale ophthalmology program, not so much because it was a great program. It was a top 20 program, but because to me, it was home. I was back in New Haven just recently, and even though I hadn't been there since this residency interview, I felt like I was home. It was me, and I was happy there. So even though it wasn't nearly one of the top places I was applying to, I was very interested. So I had written a paper. It was about an epiretinal membrane, which is a membrane that lines the eye. And it was all about what caused the membrane, what it looked like under an electron microscope. Nobody had looked under an electron microscope before. In the paper, a laser was mentioned once, a laser scanning electron microscope. And so the gentleman, the head of the department who was interviewing me, and there were about 5 interviews, said, well, Dr. Mittleman, what's a laser? And I said, well, a laser is a beam of light that's concentrated. Well, what does it stand for? And I went blank. And in these situations, sometimes they ask you a question. I have many stories like this. And I said, I don't know. Well, surely you must know, it's in your paper. It's mentioned once, I said. I was a little snotty with him, and I said, it's not the focus of the paper. The focus of the paper is on limiting membranes, on wrinkles on the retina. He said, no, you mentioned laser. You should know what it means. I said, well, light, radiation, emitted radiation, that's not good enough. I want to know what the whole thing is. And I said, can't we just mark me wrong? That was my usual go-to. I don't know. Let's just move on. He said, if you don't know what laser is, you can't come to this program. As it turned out, he had a brain tumor. He was inappropriate with many of the interviewers. If he didn't like your tie, he would actually cut your tie off with the scissors during the interview and say, I can't look at this tie while I'm interviewing you. The interview ended. As I'm walking out the door, of course, the stress is just let go. And I go, light amplification by stimulation of emitted radiation. And he goes, too late.
Oh, my gosh. You've mentioned before, and I love this quality about you, and I think it's something we all, again, can learn from, is that you've said, I am not afraid to say, I don't know. I don't know.
You can't know everything.
But you say, but I'm going to find out.
Exactly.
And that's I think, one of your great qualities, Dr.
So
Mittleman.
the most horrifying story, I was interviewing at a place called Manhattan Eye and Ear, actually Manhattan Eye, Ear, Nose, and Throat Hospital, which the hospital is in existence. The residency program folded some time back, and my understanding is they're restarting. There was a very famous doctor named Fred Jacobiak. He was an ocular pathologist, world famous, along with Ralph Eagle at Wills Eye Hospital and Richard Green, who I worked with. They were the titans of ocular pathology. And if you didn't know what something was, you could send the slides to them, and they would tell you what it was. I'm sitting at a boardroom table, and Dr. Jacobiak is at one side, I'm at the other side, and there are 6 people on either side of the table. So it's very intimidating. And they're asking questions, and Fred Jacobiak looks at me and says, what's your favorite disease? And I looked up and said, favorite disease? He said, should a disease be anybody's favorite? I said, a disease is not a good thing. No, what's your favorite disease? And I said, systemic or ocular? Is it a body disease or an eye disease? Well, Fred took his fist, pounded it on the table, coffee went spilling, and said, is there a difference? Of course, what are you going to say? Yes, there's a difference. No, of course there's no difference, Dr. Jacobiak. So what's your favorite disease? And I sit there with 13 other people watching me. And I said, I guess maybe sarcoidosis. It's interesting. It's so many. As I'm speaking, he takes his hand again, pounds it on the table doubly hard, more coffee spills. Everybody on the table has eyes wide open. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? And he looks at me and says, "That's my favorite disease, Mittleman. I'm hoping you come here next year." And I let out a sigh of relief. And lo and behold, he had done a lot of research into ocular sarcoidosis. I did not know that. And it was obvious by my face I didn't know that. It was a real and true answer. But they called me up and said, "We want you to come." And I said, "Yeah, okay." It's not where I wanted to go. I would have loved living there. It was in my neighborhood, Upper East Side. The people were friendly. It was a lot like Will's, but Will's was better.
That you lucked into that one, didn't you?
Oh, absolutely.
So what are some other words of wisdom from your being interviewed and as an interviewer?
So this is not a story about me. I tell the story all the time. It's a story about my very good friend, Denise Dufer. I love Denise. She was a medical school colleague, classmate. She was a short woman. She was probably about 5'4", and she was feisty. She was brilliant, but even better, she had street smarts. She actually had survived lymphoma. That comes into the story a little later. And she was a little older because she had to take time off in the middle of college for treatment. It took 2 years. And she was essentially cured. Sometimes you're in remission, but they had decided she was cured. So she was applying for medical school, and she had great grades. She had a little dip in the middle of college because she had to get treatment for lymphoma. And so she's sitting at some smaller medical school in the South. And like most of us, she applied to places she didn't necessarily want to go, but she needed backup schools because she wanted to be a doctor more than anything else. And I wasn't there, but I sort of think of the resolute desk in the White House, the big oak or mahogany desk, and the head of the chairman of the Department of Medicine was behind it, firing questions off at Denise. And like some heads of department do to aggrandize themselves, he was in a big chair, and Denise was in a little chair on the other side of the table. And he looked at her 2/3 of the way through the interview and barked at her. "Don't you want to be a kept woman, Miss Dufer? Doesn't every woman want to be a kept woman?" And
No, wait, what year was this?
This was in 1983.
Okay.
And Denise didn't really know what to do, and she just sat there stunned. Denise is, as I said, a feisty woman. Well, he didn't like they were silent, so he jumped up, leaned across the table, and said, "Miss Dufer, I asked you a question. Don't you want to be a kept woman, Miss Dufer? Doesn't every woman want to be a kept woman, Miss Dufer?" She jumped up, got to within 2 inches of her face, and yelled out some words which I can't say on the radio, and walked out. The next day, she was called by the head of the trustees, offering her a full scholarship and immediate admission into the medical school. And Denise said, "Why would I want to go to the medical school when the head of the Department of Medicine is such another word I can't say on the radio?" And they said, "Well, he will not be here when you're here." And they fired him.
Wow.
And she was offered full admission. And so the moral of the story is, first of all, not every woman wants to be a kept woman. That's, we're not living in the dark ages. Yeah. But stand your ground. If someone intimidates you unnecessarily, give it right back to them. And if you don't get the job, you didn't want the job anyway, not to work for someone like that. But sometimes when you stand up for your rights, you actually can make a change in the world.
It's true. I love that. Be authentic. Be true to yourself. Choose yourself first.
Correct.
That's one of those that I try to keep in mind. All right. So how about questions? Like if you are going to an interview, are these like the questions that are asked, and how do you answer like further on that?
So I'm currently interviewing residents. We have about 1,000 applicants a year for 3 spots, and we have 10 minutes. It used to be per doctor to interview each resident. We have usually 5 or 6 people over a course of an hour, and then after every hour we talk about the residents. I feel it was much nicer in person. I have some stories which I don't want to share on the radio about in-person interviews. Now they're done over Zoom. And so you can't actually see the people. You see from the neck up, from the tie up. I interviewed somebody who actually turned out to be a great resident and a good friend. And when I first met him, I said, "You're not so-and-so." And he said, "Why not?" I said, "Well, you're really short." And he said, "Well, I am." I said, "Yeah, but the person I interviewed was tall." Of course, how would I even know that? He was on a little screen on my computer. So you don't get to see the person. But I ask unusual questions. Most people ask the same questions. I ask unusual questions, and I don't really care what the answer is. I care how they answer, how prepared they are in an unfamiliar situation. Because when you're a doctor, you are presented with patient after patient from all different kinds of backgrounds and walks of life, and you have to be able to adapt yourself. So the first question I ask, and I'll ask you, Jill.
Uh-oh.
In 3 sentences, tell me who you are.
I am chatty. I am friendly. I am a mother.
That was an excellent answer. You would be stunned how many people go on not just for paragraphs, but for pages until I cut them off. And I say, I said 3 sentences. Or they'll say something like, "Well, I'm the last of 5 children, and my younger brother loves to ski, and my older sister loves to snowboard, and I don't really do that, and my father was a pathologist, and so I wanted to go into medicine." Like
The minutia.
3 sentences about you. People can't do it.
Interesting.
They just can't do it. The variant of that is, give me 3 words, and 3 words only, that tell me who you are. That's a little tougher than 3 sentences, and I don't really want to torture these applicants. I also say, you have a time machine. You can go anywhere you want, past, present, future, for 24 hours. Where would you go? Where would you go, Jill? What would you do?
That's easy. I'd go to my 20s, early 20s, and I would tell myself, "You're awesome. You've got this. You're a great singer. You can do anything that you decide to do. Don't listen to your mother."
So that would be an acceptable answer. The answer that's not acceptable is I would go into the future and see myself and then come back and tell me what I did wrong so I would do it right. That's very narcissistic. The answers I get mostly that I like are, I would go back and spend the day with my grandparents that I didn't get to know well enough. My sister died when I was younger, and I want to spend more time with her. But sometimes people give very different answers. I would give a different answer. My answer would be, I would want to spend a day in ancient Rome at the change from republic to empire. Now, that didn't happen in a day, but I would want to be in ancient Rome during those times, which are similar to our times right now. I'm very interested in the rise and fall of empires, the rise and fall of civilizations, and I can talk very fluidly about it. I had someone who said, "Oh, I love Byzantium. I want to go to Byzantium." And I said, "Okay, well, what are the other names of Byzantium?" Silence, just like that. We don't like silence on the radio, but there was silence. And she didn't know. And I said, maybe Istanbul,
I was just
maybe
going to say Constantinople.
And she said, "Oh." And I said, well, Byzantium was founded sometime, in the BC era, but a Roman emperor refounded it. Who was the Roman emperor who refounded it? And blank look. And I said,
much like mine right now.
Constantine, maybe?
Oh.
What year was it? 330 A.D.? And I said, okay, who was the emperor who changed the Roman Empire or who first converted to Christianity? Blank look. And I said, I already gave you the answer. It was Constantine in 333 A.D. He converted to Christianity. And I said, do you know anything about Byzantium? She said, well, it's my favorite time period of history. I said, but you don't know anything about it. So again, only speak about what you know, because you don't know what your interviewer is going to know.
It seemed like she said that I'm just, to impress more than an authentic answer.
We had another interviewee who said she was a sommelier. So I like wine. I'm not an expert, but I like my wine. And the residency director is a wine expert. I asked her, do you like red or white? Oh, I like them both. Well, if you had to pick one, red or white? Well, I like them both. Well, I like red. Okay, I like red too. What's your favorite red wine? Well, I like them all. I said, surely you must have one. Super Tuscan, Bordeaux, Rioja, Camonier. And she said, oh, well, those are all interesting. I haven't tried those. I said, you're a sommelier, and you're not getting admitted to our program.
Yeah. Hello.
So when you're interviewing...
By the way, you could ask me that question. I can answer like that. I love the wine, too.
So I always say be yourself. Be honest. Highlight your points that are beneficial to you and beneficial to the company or the job you're interviewing for. Always be interesting. Be interested. Because it's not just good enough to be interesting. You have to be able to listen. Active listening skills.
Yeah.
Never lie. That is the worst thing you can do. Never overinflate your CV, because you will be caught and you will not get your job. And know what you're going to be asked. Don't be surprised when you say they get 89 inches of snow. Because you can set booby traps for yourself.
That's awesome. I love that. Tony Danza, he does a cabaret show now, which, I was hesitant to go because I thought, well, this is sort of a gimmick. But, he was so entertaining. And he said one thing I'll never forget. He said, in order to be interesting, you must be interested. And you, Dr. Mittleman, are one of the most interesting people I've ever met. And it's because I know you are interested in everything that's happening in the world. And that's the beauty of this show. And one of the reasons I look so forward to every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. I get my coffee, settle in, and just can't wait to hear what in the world are we going to talk about today. It's been a pleasure once again.
Well, thank you very much for having me. This is always fun for me, and hopefully people get some laughs and maybe some take-home points.
Oh, absolutely. So we'll see you next Saturday, 8 a.m.
See you then.
Thank you for listening to Through the Eyes of Dr. Mittleman here on Legends Radio. You can tune in every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. for another edition, brought to you by Mittleman Eye, 561-500-2020 or mittlemaneye.com.